everyone. We'll get started and we may be able to record the conference, so I'll get a little format. But first of all, I'd like to welcome you all to Charles Sturt Uni and to our video conference facilities that we sort of use and normally can connect remotely with people on other campuses. And hopefully we will have someone beaming in because we've timed it for some people, but they were coming to another meeting, so hopefully they'll arrive. Now, I've just recently become the chair of the SET HERDSA group, so I'm very excited about that. And hoping that that we can form a really active community talking about teaching and learning and so many people with a lot of expertise and interest in the area. Now, for this event, it's my pleasure to, first of all, to introduce Jeff Crisp, who's going to introduce our guest speaker, Dieter Schonwetter, who will be familiar to many of his publications on teaching philosophy statements. But first of all, I thought I can introduce Jeff Crisp, who tells us he's recently come to Canberra, and he's been in Canberra for about 3.5 months now. So it's very exciting to have you as an angel to Jeff. Jeff has extensive experience in teaching for leadership and roles at both a lot of universities, but at the University of Adelaide and RMIT before becoming Pro Vice Chancellor Academic at the University of New South Wales, and he is now Deputy Vice Chancellor. Jeff was originally a chemistry academic, and like many of us, came from a discipline to practice extensively teaching and learning. Jeff has received a number of awards for excellence in teaching and learning and in technical education, to the Australian Learning and Teaching Council Fellowships in 2006 and 2009, and he is a HERDSA principal. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Pam, for that kind introduction. And yes, as Pam said, I was once a real academic, and did really enjoy my time in chemistry, which was a lot of fun. And I know I'm going to introduce Dieter, but I just wanted to point out that for many academics, and I thought about this about myself as well in the early days when I was in chemistry, I really floundered around for quite a while, working out how you would actually engage students in a more effective way and how you would actually improve your own teaching. And that was really what got me interested in learning and teaching in the first place, and why I actually then went out and sought a better way of engaging my own students. And that was the journey that I've been on. I'm still on that journey because I still don't know the answer. I think we have more insights now. We're going to hear from Dieter about some of those insights and how that translates into when academics talk about themselves as well and what it is that they're trying to achieve. And if someone had asked me in very early days to come up with a teaching philosophy statement, I probably would have, first of all, I would have said, I have no idea. And then I probably would have thought about teaching rather than learning, because that's how I probably would have described it. And I would have said something along the lines of, I teach, therefore I am. And I think one of the things that we need to absolutely make sure with our students is it's actually we're learning just the same as the students are learning. And therefore I'd say now, for my teaching philosophy statement, would be something along the lines of, we learn and we learn together in doing it. So I just thought I'd start with that, because I think it's important when we're going to talk about teaching philosophy statements, not only about their purpose, but sort of instrumental things like promotion, things like teaching awards, but actually what do they really need to do? What's the fundamental statement that we want to make about ourselves in terms of that? So we're going to hear from Dieter. As Pat said, Dieter is well known. Dieter is currently the Associate Dean for Academic and College of Dentistry at the University of Manitoba. And I've actually known Dieter for quite a while, and I was just saying to Dieter earlier, my earliest recollection of Dieter was actually back at the University of Adelaide, where I was. And there was an academic there called Tracy Winning, who was in the dentistry school there. And it was when Tracy, I think, invited Dita to come over and probably do some workshops and do some other activities. And I remember Tracy getting in contact with me and saying, oh, we're getting this person out from Canada. They're really good. You really should come along. And I was so pleased that I did come along to see Dita. There's a couple of things that really impressed me, Dita, and I'll say this. I haven't actually said this to you, but I just wanted to let you know about this, at least from my first impressions. Dita was absolutely fantastic at engaging people. That's the thing that I remember absolutely. And it wasn't just in this sort of personal manner. It was actually about the way you thought about what you were doing as well, about how you actually engage with people. And it's not, you didn't just do presentations. What you did is you brought people into a conversation. And that was the thing that really impressed me. And I've seen you a couple of times now, and each time you've done exactly the same thing. You have a generosity of spirit that actually draws people in to the conversation that you have. So I thought I'd just mention that because it's really important. We often, we do often bring in, high-flying people from overseas to, tell us their insights and all the wonderful things. And look, that's great, and I've heard some really interesting people. But I don't often hear people who have a generosity of spirit that is so inclusive that it actually includes you in the conversation. So that's what we're going to hear today from Dita. Dita's going to be talking today about the teaching philosophy statements, and this is a piece of work that you've been doing with some Canadian and Australian colleagues, part of the 3M work. I also note that Dita is a great friend of HERDSA. You've engaged with HERDSA members and with HERDSA events over many years, and is also part of that, the STLHE, Things to Do with Pod. Dita reminded me as well that we were together in Japan a number of years ago, where the Japanese equivalent, I guess, to what they were trying to set up a group that would look at, they call it teaching assistants, I think, don't they? Yeah, because they used to be American term for teaching assistants, often what we call sessions or HDRs who are doing teaching. And what they brought together people from Australia, UK, Canada, and the US, and the organisations. And I got to go there as part of HERDSA when I was part of HERDSA because they wanted the representatives from the professional organisation, the education professional organisations there. And we both just made the comment too that I think it was about 4 weeks after we'd been there was when the earthquake occurred in Japan and tsunami, which caused a huge event. It was to Hoku University. So, Dita, I've really enjoyed following you all of these years. So we'll be talking later as well when we get to the questions. But Dita, please come and include us in a conversation around teaching philosophy statements. Thanks so much.
It's glad to be here, and my hat goes off first of all to Robert Kennelly because he came to visit us in was it 2 years ago now with Moria, and 20 minutes before he got onto the board of the plane, he turned around and gave me his little teaching book about tattle and told me, Dieter, read this, I'm going to contact you in a few weeks. And that started our adventure. I didn't realize what would happen, and now I'm here at one of as his guest and host and their family. Thank you so much, Moya and Robert, for doing that, and also the family too for being there. And it's a joy just to be able to work with people and get to know them and learn about them. And it's through relationships that we actually discover and realize who we are. Just a little bit more background from myself. Thanks to the HERDSA conference, we were exposed to a Mari teaching, and it was very important and helped me to realize, and I'm going to be changing my teaching philosophy when I get back home again, is that I'm only one spot in this world of knowledge and ideas. People have come before me, people will continue after me, and it was very helpful to be replaced or placed into that thinking. And so I do come from a land where we have indigenous people, from the Ojibwe, the Cree, and the Métis, and their rivers where I live are the Red River and the Assiniboine, and it's a very sacred area. I belong to two beautiful immigrant parents. My father's from Germany, my mother from Paraguay, but Dutch, and I have a wonderful sister she was born in United States. We represent an international family. I was born in Canada. I have two beautiful children. They're 20 and 22, and they continue this idea about teaching. My wonderful spouse is also teaching immigrant people coming to Canada to help them realize their potential and then give back to society. So we're all part of this process, and it's delightful. And when you think about teaching, it does come back to your heart. Where does it come from? And this is what we're going to explore today as we discuss this idea about the teaching philosophy statement. So before we get into the questions, I thought we set a little bit of a context here. Just want to acknowledge that it is a team of 5 that I'm representing here. I'm just the representative. We have 5 individuals who created this research team, and we have Giza Rube, Dr. Corley McCormick. Some of you may know her from this area. Myself, Robert, and Nicole Wilson. And something very important about our research that we do, we want to empower the next generation. So we had a graduate student come on board, and she's all excited about this. About being part of this as well. Right now she's very close to giving birth to her first child, and so we are looking with great anticipation as to what's going to happen there. HERDSA helped us with our grant, as well as the Educational Developers Caucus in Canada, and the idea there was to help us put together a team to look at a number of people's research philosophy statements and to interview them to see what has happened over the time period. So just as we set the context, we'll look at what we've done, and then I want to give you a framework from which the teaching philosophy statement started, and then show you the research, and then talk a little briefly about team, which we've been learning as we've been doing the workshops at these different universities, both in Auckland as well as here in Australia. So when we go back, it comes back to the systematic and critical rationale, this idea of what teaching philosophy is. And I was also asked when I was younger, what is your teaching philosophy statement? And I have no idea what it was. I did a good job of presenting in the classroom. The committee thought I could answer the questions really well. And when the president asked me, said, "Peter, what's your philosophy?" I was stunned. I didn't know how to answer that. Thank goodness I was working on my philosophy in doctorate degree for psychology, so I figured it must be a defense of something, right? And we said teaching, so that was the first thing. So I defended teaching, and it seemed to work because I got the job. And then the graduate students who then came after me, who asked for advice, how do you write a teaching philosophy statement, Dieter? And so I wrestled with that with a team of 3 other people, my director at the center, as well as 2 graduate students. And so we tried to figure out over 18 months what we could do to help our graduate students, and we came up with this definition. It has to be systematic, like almost like a defense, and a critical rationale to explain. And as you mentioned before, not just teaching, but also learning. And as you're doing that, what is your context? It can be high school, university, whatever area you are teaching in, even in business as well. So understanding that. And then the key thing too is that you have to be sensitive to the cultural context. We've had a lot of graduate students who have created teaching philosophy statements because they want to be hired by the institution. And so they wrote it in order to be socially acceptable. And they forgot to bring their heart into it. 2 to 3 years later, they were upset or it didn't work out, and they dropped out, they moved on, and they couldn't understand why that happened. It was because they weren't true to their heart. And so we need to be sensitive to contextual factors, including our own, where it's coming from. Now my definition is very quantitative in nature, and we've had one of our researchers, Giza Rube, she helped to bring it back the other way, to more of a narrative, more of a belief perspective. And what she talks about, this idea is that it has to be a narrative of insights, of teaching and learning, and especially the beliefs in the heart. You need to bring those forward somehow. And added to that is that who you are as an individual. And so often as academics, we fail to bring the I back in again. We've been told how to talk about third person and to do it from a descriptive, even quantitative perspective. But now we need to bring back the I, the individual. So over the 18 months that we worked together as a team, we came up with this model to help understand. So we looked at the literature to see what was out there. There was very limited information out there other than Chisholm's 7 questions. And so then we create these components. And these are the 6 critical areas in higher education at the time that talked about teaching and learning, especially when it came to hiring students into full-time positions as academics. So definition of teaching and learning for sure. Added to that was the learner and student development, and then student-teacher relationship, how I relate to the student, and how the student relates to me. And then added to that are the teaching methods as well as the impact on learning or assessment. And then we created a number of different beliefs or columns to understand each of the components. We start with belief, and this is where you bring your values forward. What exactly is it that you really want to do when it comes to teaching? What makes it so important to you? And this was an opportunity to share one's beliefs on exactly those things. So you then go down each of these 6 items here, and you talk about your belief in terms of the definition of teaching, the definition of learning, even all the way down to the bottom, down to how you believe learning occurs and how you would assess the learners themselves. And the key thing too is that, and years ago we've seen that happen where people would hand in teaching philosophy statements, but they wouldn't line up with their portfolios or the documents they would provide. And so then we looked at the fact that there has to be some type of an alignment. So there's a connection, so the documents that you show connect with that. So we brought in the column of practice or manifestation. So anytime you talk about your teaching beliefs, what does it look like in the classroom? So if you talk about you being a coach, well, what does it look like when it comes to student learning? Are they being like athletes? Are they learning from you? Are you sort of a step ahead of them, guiding them, but letting them do the playing? And that's the whole area of manifestation. Then we added the third area. We know that a teaching philosophy statement, it never stays stagnant. If it does, then usually the person is not a very good teacher. It's constantly evolving. And so what are the goals for the future? Or what are the goals in terms of teaching the students? What are the goals from your values that you want to see happen within your area when you teach? And what are your own personal goals? Where do you want to grow as an individual when it comes to teaching? And so we have now 3 different columns of components: your belief, how it's manifested, and also the goals that you anticipate going forward in terms of growth and development. So now you can see you have this beautiful 18-cell grid. Wonderful, right? As an academic, I've got it cut down right down to the magical thing. The only problem with that is it becomes too mechanical, and so you have to be very careful about that. But as you're doing this, you've got to make sure that it's everything that you write about. So when you're going across these 3 different dimensions, the belief, practice, and the goals, that they're congruent. There's connection, alignment, as you said before. So my belief, if I believe that it's an active learning environment, then I need to also demonstrate that happens in my classroom, where the students are somehow being actively involved in the learning process. And then my goals for the future, or for student development, or my own development, which need to focus around this idea about this active learning. So that has to be congruent going that way, as well as being congruent going up and down the 6 columns. And so now you've got a very comprehensive. And so I invited my students to then think about how to take these areas and build a comprehensive teaching idea, put down bullets, ideas, keywords into these cells here, and then use that as your framework from which to write your paper or your narrative. That wasn't good enough, though. One of my colleagues said, "No, Dieter, we got to bring in a critical incident or a metaphor." And when you think back to your own teaching, some of us have had really critical incidences where life has changed, and as a result you want to teach because of that, or something negative happened that causes you to think, hey, I'm not going to teach like that, I'm going to be different. For me, it was in 1993 when I was hired at this college by this president who said, asked that question on my teaching philosophy statement. On Monday mornings, I had the opportunity to go on my knees with my father and pray for the class and for teaching. I was a religious school at that time. And the cool thing there is I remember it's not so much the prayer or the religion, but the fact that someone like my father was a mentor and was caring enough about his students, he carried that caringness attitude toward me. And I learned so much from that process. And to this day now, when I go to my classes, I remember the students when I'm thinking during the day about them. I've heard of classical teachers who won teaching awards. They will often sit down in the student's seat who is very problematic and just think about them. And then when they go to teaching, it's much more easier because they try to figure out where the student's coming from rather than seeing them as a difficult person. Just that philosophy change here. So it can either include a metaphor or a critical incident, and so we invite people to put that into their teaching philosophy statement. So that's the framework from which we looked at writing a teaching philosophy statement. Apparently that paper was picked up by Robert McNally and your team, right? And used it. And then we came together now in 2 years, and we have now gone back and looked at teaching philosophy statements both in Canada as well as Australasia. We look at the HERDSA group as well as the 3M which is the Xerox company that produces these photocopiers. They gave us money for fellows in Canada. And we interviewed these and asked them very specifically, what happened with your teaching philosophy statement in the sense of as you grew, as you worked in academia, and as you went through the journey. And we developed a number of analysis and looked at it from a qualitative perspective. And we came up with these 4 areas that were very interesting. First one was the value of the teaching philosophy statement. And here you can see that there were key things such as capacity building for the effective learning and teaching. So as I reflect on my teaching philosophy statement, the capacity for thinking about teaching and learning builds. Add to that is reflecting and enacting goals and values so I can make them more real. And many people, when they do this, they discover that when they first did it, it was more for a job, it was extrinsic, but slowly it became intrinsic, and they became more aware of who they were as teachers and what really frustrated them and why they were frustrated, and were able to understand that. It increases career opportunities. And you've gone through a number of careers yourself, Jeff, right? And the teaching philosophy statement has helped as you've gone through your journey. And then for development as well, it increases impact over time. It also has a very powerful collaborative reflective practice. This idea when you're working with others in a team, and we've seen that in HERDSA, especially in the tattle groups that Robert has been working with for the last 10, 15 years now, something like that, and how he has helped people grow and realize that. And then the whole writing process too, to help people put into words their feelings, their heart desires, their passion when it comes to teaching. Very effective. And then from there we looked at the whole area of having impact in teaching and learning. It gives people confidence to engage and talk about effective teaching and learning. When you're sitting around a committee, when you're evaluating the effectiveness of teaching, when you're hiring a new faculty member, all these sorts of things are very good. Being confident to talk about the value and importance of that teaching module. Also being able to enact values on teaching and learning situations. And we've seen also the support of students and staff. What we mean by that is that many people who write teaching philosophy statements will also on the first day of classes show it to their students. And students are like, oh wow, this is interesting. Some even taught their students how to write a teaching philosophy statement as part of the practicum or their work in the class. And for staff, a number of the people who were interviewed became administrators or managers, and they were the ones who advocated for teaching as the teaching domain in Canada, and we've also discovered in Australia, as our universities are moving more to a business model. We're trying to make lots of money by bringing international students, cutting back our programs, larger classes, and making sure that the grades have to be a certain high level or we don't get paid for it. So all of a sudden the teaching is being challenged. For these individuals, they were the advocates. They would go back into the programs either as managers or administrators and promote the value of teaching and make sure that it continues during these difficult times. In the institutional context, we discovered that from the interviews, it's very formulaic in the sense of, please give me your teaching philosophy statement. There's 200 words. Here's a box, fill it in. That's it, right? Or these are things that we're looking for when it comes to promotion. And then also this idea that there needs to be more recognition and support when it comes to teaching and helping the people. And in our workshops, we've done, I think, 22, 23 now, from New Zealand to Australia. A lot of people are saying the same thing. We need more recognition, more support, have more opportunities to talk about teaching. And when they've been around the tables and at our workshops, many of them are delighted that for the first time they've been able to hear others talk about teaching, and it really empowers them. And the idea of also institutional processes excluding or lacking teaching philosophy linkages. So there's no connections to the heart anymore. It's almost become an academic practice. At one of the universities we discovered that it's become a tick box. Give you teaching philosophy statements, this is what we're looking for, here's a template. Well, the person's not talking about themselves anymore. They're now talking about what the institution needs. So there's a big disconnect between their passion. And so now we're wondering why many people in the area of teaching are starting to lose interest in higher education. Just breaking apart one of the areas were personal and professional development, the capacity building that we discovered. And the themes are 6 very important ideas. It enhanced self-awareness, even including the spiritual part, and as well as understanding of teaching self. There's also an increased confidence, and credibility about one's teaching. People feel much more confident When they first started out, they did things for the institution because that's what was asked of them. But as they developed, they discovered, you know what, I don't like to teach that way because that goes against my morals or my values. I'd rather do it this way. And so they were able to then move in as stronger individuals. There were also opportunities for reflections, which made visible and clarified teaching values and beliefs. Again, this idea, it came from the heart, so they can make it stronger connections with their soul as to why they're doing what they do. It also enabled deeper engagement with student learning and quality of teaching. As you look at classes, as you teach them, when there were difficulties, they would reflect on that to see what can I do differently. And it's only because of that reflection that they could do that. And number 5, it enhanced teaching skills and knowledge. Because as you're doing your teaching philosophy statement, you're always looking outside, going to conferences, trying to explore new ideas, and find ways to bring them in, and add that to your teaching philosophy. And the biggest, I think, the most important one was that when people did their teaching philosophy, doing it with groups of people, with individuals, like mentors, or in communities of practice, making sure that was safe space to share and to be vulnerable about one's teaching philosophy was critical to be true to oneself. And then hearing other people and discovering that, hey, I'm not by myself, there are others who are struggling as well, and affirming and encouraging one another was very, very useful. With all the research that we discovered in this one area here, we noticed that there's a sense of resilience that's coming through. No one used the word resilience, but as we talked and looked at it, we noticed that that theme seems to keep popping back up again. And some of the resilience literature shows there are 4 areas: motivation, reflection, and relationship. The literature identifies it in certain areas, and the 16 interviewees demonstrated almost a match to that. For motivation, it went from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic, to almost a sense of calling or vocation, not just teaching for the sake of money, but it came from within. The transformative part, this idea about really being critical about oneself and trying to understand how teaching actually works, even to the point where you're willing to make changes in your life as a result of hearing others and going deeper. And then the self-efficacy, we talked about that before already. People who are resilient, they're confident. They know why they teach. It doesn't matter what the environment around them is going to be doing, whether it's going to be shortening of time or resources, that they love teaching so much that they can make it through those difficult times. And the last one, and the most important again, is this idea that for resilience, you need relationships. You need people to help you. You need that community. You need mentors. You need people who will help you to develop that, as well as resources to support that. In terms of team teaching, Robert and I have been doing these workshops more recently with teams, and this idea about team teaching is a new challenge for us to try to parallel the whole individual teaching philosophy statement. And in our workshops that we did, and we talked to people, we uncovered these ideas with them. And these are the ideas that came forward. This idea about building team cohesiveness is important. So when you develop team teaching, you do the same thing as you would with these learning communities. You bring people into a room, make sure that it's safe, and that's a place where people can be very vulnerable, and then have them share their beliefs and values and see how they resonate with one another. And it's amazing how that builds team. Second one is the ability to share and collaborate on beliefs and values. So as I hear your values and I talk and discuss mine, we affirm and validate them and find ways to find synergy between that, which moves us forward as a team. The other one, too, the ability to assess how each other's shared beliefs and values are manifested. So when you say that you love teaching for a certain sake, what does it look like? Explain it, describe it. It's not a judgment, but it's more about defining what it is. And how can we then teach together? And then as soon as we do that, we discover what our potentials are, what our gifts are. So maybe you might be really good at engaging students. I might be more knowledge-based and get the facts. So we'll find ways to work together that way. So it's a very powerful way then to bring a team together. And the other one is the ability to set goals for the teams to advance the team in terms of teaching. So this idea that we can then now, once we know what we're doing and how we're going to be doing it, we can set goals as a team to then work at enacting and enabling that. So you can see that the framework that we put together for the teaching philosophy statement works very well with teams as well, whereby you have that safe environment and collaborative practice. So in summary, when we looked at our research that we've done up to this point, and also all the work we've done with the Thanks to someone coming in on that line, right?
Someone online.
Yes. We've identified a number of areas that are very important when it comes to the contemporary teaching philosophy research. Academic resilience is a big one, and we need that right now. This is very timely as we are going through some major shifts in the way we do academic. The capacity building, being able to strengthen the idea about teaching and the value of it. The teaching confidence and competence, feeling very strong and knowing what my personal view is and being able to explain that and share with other people, to enact on one's values, and then also to bring in the team as part of this whole process is very critical going forward. So that's the context. I'm very glad and thankful for Robert for bringing me, connecting with the team. And we also have been able to do this together. And these are the findings that we have here to sort of set the context to address the two questions that are set before us. So let's move into our discussion now.
Let's square the circle, shall we? Is that okay, Pam?
Yes, absolutely. I'll just check. I'm not sure where.
How do we tell if they're online?
But we should have, we should see an image on one of the screens, But so normally, if it's a VC, you normally actually see the room. But if it's someone on a computer, often they're a little image.
Okay. I just think I wouldn't want to ignore them if there's
No,
actually people out
absolutely.
there.
Yeah. I rang Kogi, but she may have been, her meeting. Anyhow, we don't know. I have learned to recently.
Would you chair this
I thought Jeff might come. Jeff, you should.
No, Jeff and Dita will need some sort of supervision.
Oh, okay. Well, I personally have a question, and I will open it up. Does anyone else have a question?
I have a very basic question. So there's the 2002 records. Is this much more recent research that you're doing, or is this back to 2002?
Research is more recent. We have more schedule for the present. And we're actually meeting in 2 weeks to discuss how we move forward.
My question, I'm very interested in the idea of developing that team key segments through attention philosophy statement. And so did you have, how did it actually work? Can you describe that? How the process was held with a team and teaching?
That was our recent finding for the workshops.
The thing that you were talking, you had there about using a team, getting people to talk about their values collectively.
When we started this research when we were looking at the individual teaching philosophy statement, we didn't think about the team. And then we were challenged by 2 of the universities to bring it. It's a big challenge because it helped us to understand how we can approach it. It's so critical to us that the individuals have a good sense of what the teaching philosophy is. Once they have sort of a general sense of them, they can then share with other groups, especially with teams. Just into the fact that it has to be a safe environment for them to learn. That's what we
Chatham House.
Yes.
Yeah, which one? Canada, we had a different one.
That's English.
In Canberra. And so as a result of that, as a critical, this cost has to be built. And it's interesting, many times when we put people into groups, there's a first time they have to teach each other. What we have to do as academics, administrators, is that we have programs we set into place, and then we talk to people who go and teach us and do it as a team. Instance, right? And we forget about talking with humans there, we focus on understand what is it like to work and how we can. So teaching philosophy for the team.
I was going to say, did you develop a team? I didn't see you working, but did you develop a team teaching philosophy statement, or did it just, did they just discuss their different beliefs and practices and things like that, or did they tend to create a team philosophy?
It is that sort of starting point, and normally the title that we do 6 weeks one time, and a couple weeks afterwards, and years to So what we did is we did micro assignments. So we started to talk about the definition of teaching. Just gave story. It was amazing how they knew each other for the first time, and they was able to build that relationship. And they're hungry to do more. And so we so it was a start.
Thank you, Dieter. I have lots of questions and ideas. What I like most about the presentation is that you managed to put a high into things. I think it's something sometimes it's all these bubbles there, we could talk about them, but because we started talking about team teaching, I'm very interested in that relationship between your ideas on team teaching that you mentioned in this research phase and the tablet groups. First, when I was listening to you, I thought, maybe it's a good idea to sit down my team, staff who work in the same program, and think about team teaching philosophy. So that would be the philosophy of our team. It would be a challenging task because I think the individual philosophies would be quite different. Or are we looking at team teaching and sharing ideas like what we did in TADL, where there would be academics from across the university and talk about our individual philosophies, but within that group that allows for exchange. So I wasn't quite clear.
Well, TADL is not a team in the sense that Dieter was just talking about. I mean, TADL's inside a collaborative team, yes, but you're on an individual journey.
Yes.
What we were challenged with at Western Sydney and Canberra was
a team teaching.
Yes. And I think, watch this space. I think Dieter and I will be sharing with Geezer and Coralie about what does this mean, because this came from, in case of both Western Sydney and University of Canberra, from the senior management. And we might ask a specific question about that in a moment.
Well, you should ask the senior manager.
Well, as it so happens, Jeff, we have one here.
I'll follow up on that. But I was actually going to put in a controversial question. It's okay. Universities now sort of require a teaching philosophy statement as part of the academic promotion process. I'm going to ask a really honest question. Is that good or bad? Does it actually cause problems? And it doesn't actually change the way people would approach a teaching philosophy statement. Because basically, if you put in a promotion application, you're going to be judged. It's not a friendly, we're here to help you type of environment when it comes to promotion. Right? You are looking for evidence of impact, evidence of outcomes. It's really quite hard-nosed, or at least that's my experience in those two places. And in the end, someone's either going to say yes or no, to achieve. Now, we've just been talking about teaching philosophy statements being from the heart, team ones as opposed to individual ones. How does all of that mesh with actually the university requiring a teaching philosophy statement to be put inside the promotion, which is going to be hard-nosed, relevant evidence and impact?
Good question. One of our responses on the workshop is, this workshop is really idealistic.
It's true. Yeah. Absolutely.
But then the flip side to that is, we need to be true to our heart. When it comes to evaluating teaching portfolios and dossiers in Canada, most of the times the dossiers, the portfolios assess on the documents, not only like the philosophy statements. And the philosophy statement is sort of like an introduction as to why you do what you're doing, and sort of helps navigate and set the parameters as this is my way of teaching. And like you said before, this idea it has to be alignment then. If this is how you believe, we'll make sure it aligns with the documentation you're using. It's the documentation that we're using, and usually the university has criteria for the documentation, right? The teaching philosophy statement, when we make it, when we tell them you have to have exactly these things in the teaching philosophy statement, yes, and to me it doesn't become real anymore. Then we cut the line. We want the person still to be genuine, to sort of set the foundation and the framework, but then to develop the documents that show what we're doing. And the other thing I'd love to see happen is, and this is something that many people struggle with, is when they do put the failures in, they're scared of being failures. They're done with failures, right? Yeah. Because then they feel they can be judged. And I like it. I don't know which workshop you were at, where there were some people who were also on the administration in the session. Well, I will advocate for you. I'm here to do that. For Angela and Malcolm.
Right, yes.
She talked about the fact that people were scared. They would probably say things like Peter and Robert. You can't always be honest because when it's going to be valued, like you said, they may make it work. And then when Angela says, no, I will advocate for you. What you need to do though is to show where you have the issue and what you're doing, what the goal is, right? And show that you're actually looking at making changes rather than just sitting there and not doing anything.
Does senior management, Jeff, understand what it loses by ensuring that the philosophy statements are not effective?
It's speaking on behalf of all students.
No, just one.
Look, it's a good question. I was almost going to say to you, they might understand it, but do they care?
Yes.
This is probably the bottom line. I think for many senior managers, the idea of having a teaching philosophy statement in the first place is really to, quite frankly, to look for alignment with the either the strategic direction of the university or what that senior manager has said is their belief. Because these people are going up for promotion, where the senior manager might not leave. So if you're, especially, if you're a vice chancellor or president and vice president, and you come along and say, this is what our university stands for, this is what we believe in, this is the direction we're all going, and someone in a teaching philosophy statement says something quite different to that, because they actually believe in their heart something quite different. What are these people up here going to think when your teaching philosophy statement comes up in your promotion application?
If we had them in a tattle, we'd ask them to reflect.
Yes. So I think people are often pragmatic about their teaching philosophy statement, because especially, this is why I was asking the question originally, and it was almost getting to the stage of thinking, well, do we need two of them? Do we need one that you put in for promotion? Like, give Caesar what Caesar wants, and then, give God what God wants over here, which is my heart.
Yes.
So, is that really what we should be doing? Is that a better reflection of what we need to do? Because I do think some people actually are doing themselves a disservice in their teaching philosophy if they genuinely think what they believe in, and that is opposed to what the senior managers are actually proposing in the university in the direction the university should go.
I'd like to come back to that. We had one individual got her going through transition, gender transition,
Yes.
and she talked about this idea that she was being honest.
Yes.
And she was recognized because she was confident enough and was able to do that. Yes, it was challenging to administration. She was in every way that they wanted to go, but it wasn't. She was leading in the direction with it. And so it can also be a voice, for senior management to see. Okay, there's a we need to be aware of the changes.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's good if we have an environment that allows people to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's good if we have an environment where people can change with related philosophy.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that philosophy will necessarily change.
Exactly.
Somebody will change his images for that.
That's right.
But quite frankly, universities should be places where we encourage people to test and challenge the debate. So that's the whole point of the university.
Yes.
And you shouldn't be penalised for it, which I guess is why we're going to be discussion in Australia or in other countries too, around freedom of speech and academic freedom. What does that actually mean?
And just in that, when you were talking about them being formulaic, the kind of idea that it might actually stand back from the crowd might be useful to information. Yeah, I was thinking as you said that rather than everybody's. Oh, no, sorry. question.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I wanted to suggest just about two versions. But I also thought, because I can't see the commercial board as a safe space, it's required for insurance measures. So there should be, perhaps just with close colleagues, close authorities, and then that's the source of which you get. But the only other point I wanted to make was often, and I'm impressed by Dita's description of sharing the teaching philosophy with the students. Often where the real voice comes out in portfolios is when teachers are gathering all the comments that their students have made, and you can see the students know what the teacher's trying to do. And that's very powerful. And you can't do anything about the teacher or the students. So that's often where you see quite powerful results.
Oh, but Sophie's had a go at anyone else like in response to the question of should we get rid of the teaching philosophy statement, I think it would be honest to get because I think that genuine nature in India needs to be out there. And I think that those who are on the committees need to know about that. I don't think it would be a solution to say, well, I keep that personal philosophy for my behavior, and I'm not going to share it with the senior management, because it would, I haven't thought this through, but I think it would actually widen the gap or the gulf that we often have between senior management and the rest of the university. And I think that you see we have issues with that. When our voice survey indicates that. So I think that would be something that would make that gap even wider, because the senior management, they represent the rest of the university, and yes, we do have the university mission, but does the teaching philosophy can it not fit into the wider mission of the university? I think the mission of any university in Australia can also be supported, because it's pretty broad. It's about big values. I cannot see academics not embracing those values. The teaching philosophy is a much more personal statement. So I wouldn't want to look at these two things as something that can go together.
No, I agree with you. There shouldn't be, in principle, there shouldn't be a disconnect between the two. But we do have academics who genuinely disagree with some of the direction that some of the senior managers espouse in terms of what the university should be done. And I just give you a simple example, because this is what UC is a relatively small university. So one of the things that many people value within the university is the fact that it's small. The fact that it can have a small number of students in the classroom, so a student can interact with a teacher can interact with a smaller group of students. Take my previous university, where I took the biggest class in USW, which was a first year accounting. So first year accounting had 700 students for that first year class. Now it's really difficult for those academics to have an individual relationship with 700 students. Now what if someone in USW said, well actually my teaching philosophy is small group teaching. I actually believe that we should only have 20 students in the classroom, and that's how I engage with my students. That's the best way that I think that should happen. UNSW might think, well, that's all very nice to say that, but you're never going to get it. And we actually don't want you to teach 20 students, we want you to teach 700. That's how, because that's the size of what we've got. Take UC, where people might say we value having 20 students in the classroom, and you've now got a senior manager who says you can't just have 20 students in the classroom. I want you to have 200 students in the classroom, not 20. Because the margins of return on your courses are absolutely abysmal, and it's costing us too much money to run these courses. So again, I'm just trying to sort of put it in perspective around, yes, there can be, there could be a genuine. I agree with you about the general stuff. Like we all agree we want to enhance student experience. We all agree we want to do, have good career outcomes. We want to regulate our commutes. We've all got all that. But this is where I think it comes down to these other issues about your personal beliefs about the teaching. We also have some, senior managers who are saying, actually, we want really, we need a lot of blended learning. So therefore, you're going to have to do some online stuff. We have other academics who say, well, actually, I don't believe this online. I think face-to-face is the best way of teaching. So, you can actually get some genuine differences of opinion.
Yeah, I can strongly see that with online and there's learning online. It is hard to checks and a lot of people would say, the best way of teaching is face-to-face.
Yes. So it was in that context that I made my comment, where I can see that you might get some disconnect sometimes.
But here we're looking at, we're looking at variables on the one side to give you a distinction, and these are more like methodological issues, small group structuring, online versus blending of face-to-face. When I think of my own philosophy, I think I could try to integrate, to use my philosophy to guide me in these different settings, whether it's work, etc. So again, I can see how these things can actually work.
No, I agree.
But of course, I see your point. If you have someone, who just says, I don't know, online or whatever, then that be a conversation. But I think the point is that we need that conversation.
I think that person is pretty open to a teaching philosophy. And changes happen, which are moving toward the goals and how we talk about. How would I now embrace and how do I move? So I have values of small groups. I'm asked to teach large groups. Okay, well, maybe we'll make it creative and making small groups with more large groups.
Yeah.
And so I should be passionate still. And so the philosophy still can still be real and genuine. Rather than what we're hearing though is a lot of resistance. Rather than when we look at academic way of thinking about things. The administration is pushing things down the throat, telling us what to do. But there's also, if we can come to terms both sides, the administration tell us why it is that such a need, and help us and give us the support we need to then explore how to make something.
There's an elephant in the room, which I think we should probably take the rug off him so we can all see it. And that is that, for better or for worse, senior managers and the government have deigned that we will have corporate universities. And not all of us have taken this to heart. In fact, some of us might be resisting. No names, no patriot. And in fact, there isn't a possible alignment. I'm taking an extreme situation. Of course, there's room for alignment. But for some of us, there is no alignment because the universities have disappeared into a space where we simply don't want to go. And no amount of massage of the philosophy will ever have it in line because there's a fundamental divergence of ways. And I think that's the important elephant to uncover, isn't it? Kill the conversation.
No,
Suzanne might be able to.
I guess I just wanted to take us back to that issue of, do you back a different one for the real information? Surely what you do is a judicious use of the real one according to the terms of what's required there. You don't give this up, you don't, put in things that are going to upset people. And if they're not completely different things, we do that with everything.
It's curations.
Yes. And if they are completely different, then you go to the wrong job.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, my research, it sort of resonates with some of these things, especially when the team what became like curriculum ideologies. But I did find people were more able to take on some of the corporate things if it did resonate with their teaching philosophy. So knowing your own values and philosophy can help you to create that alignment, because people did it in like things like employability. They were able to shape that in different ways depending on the educational they understood it in different ways. And I imagine the same with teaching.